Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if you agree that service to this country has no expiration date, hit like and subscribe. Because what happened to the man you're about to meet should never happen to anyone who has worn the uniform. His name was David Harrison. Those who knew him well called him Dave. That quiet Tuesday morning, he had no intention of standing out. He wasn't there to make a scene, flaunt his medals, or boast about wars fought long ago. All he wanted was to withdraw a few $100s from an old account he hadn't touched in years. The same account where the government had deposited hazard pay for missions they still wouldn't fully acknowledge. He entered Riverside Community Bank through the front doors like anyone else, calm, quiet, holding his hat in his hands. That hat was black, embroidered with gold thread, Korea-Vietnam veteran. It had been cleaned before he left home. His shirt was pressed, though its edges were frayed. In his jacket pocket was a folded veteran's card, 2 worn discharge papers, and an old brass commemorative coin, its edges softened by time. He waited patiently in line, silent, like most men of his era, as if standing in line was still something sacred. But the moment he reached the teller, everything changed. The teller, maybe mid-20s, blinked, then raised an eyebrow at the name on the account, clearly unsure. Dave extended his ID with slightly trembling hands, not from fear, not from weakness, but from the fatigue of time and too many cold nights in nameless places. "Just trying to withdraw a little cash," he said politely. "This account's under David Harrison. Haven't touched it in a long time." The teller gave a nervous smile, typed, then paused. Something on the screen wasn't what he expected. He called the manager. The manager's name was Marcus, neat haircut, tie slightly too short, the kind of smirk that silently condescends. He looked at Dave's documents, then at Dave, then let out an unfriendly laugh. "You sure this account's really yours, sir?" he asked, stretching the words like they were a joke. "This discharge paper looks like it's from the dinosaur age." The teller let out a nervous giggle. Dave said nothing, just reached into his pocket and placed something on the counter with slow, deliberate fingers, a brass commemorative coin adorned with an eagle and 7 stars. The kind no civilian would recognize, but the kind that would steal the breath of any real soldier. Marcus didn't even glance at it. "Cute trinket," he muttered. "Anyone can buy those online now." He turned to security and jerked his thumb toward the door. "Got another stolen valor scammer trying to fool our system. Please escort him out." The security guard hesitated for just a second, but it was enough. Enough for Dave to hear every word, enough for the rest of the bank to notice. A few customers snickered behind their phones, a couple pretended not to hear. Dave didn't argue. He didn't demand anything. He just took back the coin, slid it quietly into his pocket, shook his head once, and walked slowly to the bench by the window. He sat upright, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. The laughter died down, and an odd silence settled over the bank lobby. Not guilt, not yet, but something colder. Discomfort, as if people weren't so sure anymore. But one person hadn't laughed. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, early 30s, former Air Force logistics officer, now working defense contracts. She'd seen a coin like that once before, when a retired JSOC colonel placed one on the table during a briefing. How every officer in the room had snapped to attention. She walked up to the counter, locked eyes with the manager, and said, "You just made a huge mistake." Marcus blinked. "Excuse me?" Elena pointed to the bench. "That man is no fake. That coin alone is worth more than every salary in this building," Marcus scoffed. "If he's so important, why's he alone?" Elena didn't answer. She just walked out and made a phone call. But someone else had noticed, too. In the back office, one of those quiet, titleless workers who actually knew things had heard the name David Harrison. He paused, then slowly walked to the brass plaque hanging in the corner of the room. It had been there since the bank opened, a memorial to Riverside Command Base and the men who built it. Among the engraved names, one hadn't faded. D.J. Harrison, the man who oversaw the original military infrastructure before the land was repurposed for civilian use. The same man now being accused of stolen valor in the bank he once helped establish under his own command. The employee didn't speak. He picked up the phone, dialed a number only a few knew by heart, and said 6 words. "Eagle coin, Riverside, now." Then he hung up. Outside, Dave sat motionless as stone. He didn't pull out his phone. He didn't make a scene. He just watched the flag across the street ripple in the wind and waited. Not for justice, not for praise, because men like him had always done this. They waited until they were needed. They waited even when no one believed in them. They waited while the world laughed. But no one in that bank, not the manager, not the teller, not even Elena, knew this. In 30 minutes, those laughs would turn to silence. Because down the road, a furious general had slammed his phone on his desk, put on his uniform, and was now on his way to ensure the man they'd all dismissed, the man they'd called a fake, would never be overlooked again. The general's arrival. The next 20 minutes at Riverside Community Bank passed like molasses, slow, thick, uncomfortable, especially for those who had laughed earlier. The teller who'd snickered now kept his head down, pretending to type. Marcus paced behind the counter, glancing at the front doors every few seconds, visibly uneasy, though he didn't yet know why. Dave Harrison hadn't moved. He sat exactly where he'd been told, as if this were just another government waiting room, the weight of unspoken years and a long life's toll, just another set of cold stares behind him. His hands rested on his cane, shoulders straight. That commemorative coin stayed hidden in his pocket, as unseen as his service to these people. But the silence around him had shifted. It was no longer the silence of exclusion. It was the silence of doubt. Elena Rodriguez watched him from across the lobby, arms crossed tight, lips pressed thin. She'd called her retired command liaison at Fort Hamilton. Hearing Eagle Coin and David Harrison had changed the man's tone entirely. "You're telling me he's there right now?" the voice had asked. "Do not let him leave." Elena didn't know what came next, but her instincts said something had been set in motion. She was right. 2 blocks away, a black SUV cut through traffic, flashing its lights just once, not asking permission, asserting authority. Inside sat Major General William Stone, decorated, feared, known for a temper rarely shown but legendary when ignited. Currently the regional operations chief for 4 military districts and one of only 5 men cleared for Eagle-level active reconnaissance authority. When he'd taken the call and heard the name David Harrison, he'd cut his briefing short, stood from his chair, and told his aide just 4 words. "Gear up, we're going." Harrison wasn't just a name in a file to Stone. He was the reason Stone wore stars on his shoulders. A living ghost, the kind of figure long assumed retired from field operations, the kind whispered about in strategy meetings and referenced in legacy briefings. Stone had trained under doctrine he had written. The idea of him being humiliated in public, in uniform, on land he once commanded, ignited something in the general he rarely showed: rage. Back at the bank, Dave adjusted his jacket sleeve. The quiet hum of overhead fluorescence filled the air, but no one spoke. A customer near the coffee station awkwardly left without depositing. A security guard lingered by the exit, shifting nervously, eyeing the old man who hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even seemed angry, but carried a presence that unsettled people used to authority. Marcus tried to brush off the discomfort. "Still here," he muttered, peering over the teller line. Seriously, he smirked at a new hire. Probably waiting for someone to write about him, trying to scrape up pity money. Vets do that all the time. Elena's jaw tightened. Even the young woman at the teller window bowed her head. She knew this had gone too far. Marcus leaned on the counter, smug. "Should have called the cops," he chuckled. "He'll make a scene sooner or later." But the moment the words left his mouth, the bank's glass doors swung open hard. Not the kind you could ignore. Not wind, not a customer. A command. A chill spread through the room. Real boots, not running, not hesitating, marching, struck the tile. Major General William Stone, in full dress uniform, every ribbon gleaming, every seam razor-sharp, filled the lobby without a word. His aide followed, carrying a case, stern and silent. No one moved. Sound died instantly. Phones went dark. Coffees sat half-drunk, and Marcus, still leaning on the counter, looked up, then froze. His smirk melted into silence. Stone acknowledged no one at first. His eyes locked onto Dave Harrison, still sitting by the window. Then, in front of the entire bank, the general came to attention and saluted. The sound of that gesture, the palm striking the temple, rang louder than any apology. Dave looked up, startled for just a second, then slowly stood and returned the salute with the dignity of a man who hadn't been saluted in years, but had never forgotten how. Then Stone turned sharply, scanning the room like a blade. When he spoke, his voice was low but cut glass. Who in this room accused Colonel David Harrison of stolen valor? No one answered. At first, Stone stepped forward. Colonel Harrison, he repeated, rank ice clear, was instrumental in developing joint force reconnaissance protocols still used by 3 nations. His record spans 2 wars, 6 theaters, and 14 unacknowledged operations. Who questioned his identity? Every eye turned to Marcus. The manager looked sick. I didn't know, he stammered. The papers looked old, and of course they're old, Stone snapped, because he earned those years. He fought for this country while your biggest battle was learning to schedule tweets. The silence changed again, from awkwardness to shame. Stone's aide stepped forward, opening the case. Inside was a thick file marked confidential, a commemorative medal nestled in velvet, and a scanned printout of the plaque on the bank's wall, David Harrison's name etched in bold. Stone placed the file on the counter. This bank exists because of his strategic design. The account you flagged as suspicious funded the original supply lines you now profit from. Turning back to Dave, softer now. Sir, I apologize for not knowing you were in the city sooner. Dave gave a tired nod. Wasn't here to be found, just needed enough to help my grandson's school costs. Stone slowly shook his head. Then let's make that happen. And together they walked to the counter. Marcus stepping back, hands up, silent. The laughter was long gone. The lesson was just beginning. The moment of honor. The silence in Riverside Community Bank was no longer awkward. It was reverent. Every person in that room had just witnessed something shift, as if the ground itself had remembered the weight it once carried. Major General William Stone stood beside Colonel David Harrison at the teller, not barking orders, not demanding punishment, just making it clear that until this man got what he came for, nothing else in the world mattered. Dave quietly withdrew the cash, no fanfare, for his grandson's tuition, a need he hadn't mentioned until the general asked. He hadn't wanted attention. He never did. All he'd wanted was to keep a promise to the people he'd fought beside and the ones they'd come home to. As the teller printed the receipt, her hands shook, murmuring an apology Dave didn't acknowledge. Not out of malice. He just didn't need it. He took the receipt, folded it once, and tucked it into his pocket as if the task were complete. But as he turned to leave, General Stone touched his shoulder. "Colonel, 5 more minutes," he said. Dave raised an eyebrow. "For what?" Stone gestured to the room, "For the honor you never asked for." And then, without a single shouted order, every veteran in the room, from the young reservist by the ATM to the old Navy medic filling out a deposit slip, snapped to attention and saluted. Even the civilians stood, not because they were told to, but because something in the air said, "This is how you honor such a man." Dave froze for a second, not with pride, but disbelief. Then, slowly, he returned the salute with quiet grace. Stone reached into his coat pocket and handed Dave a small velvet box. "We've been holding on to this for years," he said. "Thought it belonged with you." Inside was a clean, polished metal, engraved with just a name and 3 words, "Service Beyond Record." Dave stared at it a long time. No tears, no speech, just a slow nod like he was finally closing a door no one knew was still open. Then he looked at Stone and said softly, "I didn't come here to be remembered. I came to keep a promise." Stone nodded, "And in doing so, you reminded us all what service really means." Dave stepped into the sunlight then. No cameras followed, no headlines ran, but inside, people stood a little straighter, spoke a little softer. By the end of that week, a new line had been added to the plaque at the bank's front entrance. Beneath the original dedication, a second engraving appeared. David J. Harrison, Colonel, U.S., Army Honor and Silence. It didn't name the incident. It didn't mention the general. But everyone who worked there knew. Because some truths don't need to be shouted to change everything. And now, every customer who walks through those doors sees the name of the man they once laughed out of the building. Epilogue: The Legacy. 6 months after the incident, Riverside Community Bank was no longer just a bank. A small kiosk had been set up beside the plaque bearing Dave Harrison's name, displaying brochures on the area's military history and photocopies of David Harrison's public service records. Marcus no longer worked there. He'd resigned, not forced, but after General Stone's visit, the atmosphere hadn't suited him. He'd been replaced by Lauren Mitchell, a veteran herself, having served in Afghanistan. Elena Rodriguez had opened an account and was now a regular. She and Dave shared a silent understanding. Words weren't needed. Dave himself came in once a month, always with the same quiet demeanor. No one looked at him with suspicion anymore. If anything, the employees smiled respectfully when they saw him. His grandson's tuition had been taken care of, too. Dave didn't talk about it, but the kid had graduated with top marks and was now studying engineering. He carried his grandfather's name, David Harrison Jr. Most importantly, the words added beneath that plaque had echoed elsewhere. Other businesses in town began reevaluating how they treated veterans, especially the older ones, the quiet heroes, the forgotten servants. They were greeted differently now, because sometimes honoring one man reminds an entire community how to act. Dave Harrison's story wasn't just about a dispute in a bank. It was a reminder, in a world where service goes quietly unnoticed, sacrifice goes unthanked, and heroism hides in plain clothes, that true worth must be recognized. And that plaque still stands, a monument for every day that passes, a lesson for generations to come, and a forever salute to silent heroes like David Harrison.